The air in the Salmon-Challis National Forest doesn't just sit. It breathes with a prehistoric weight that settles deep in your lungs. Out here, the shadows aren't just a lack of light. They are thick, viscous things that seem to cling to the trunks of the ancient pines like tar. You get the sense that the land remembers a time before man, and it isn't particularly fond of our intrusion. It is a place of jagged granite and deceptive silence. A silence that feels less like peace and more like a predator holding its breath. Every step into the Idaho high country is a step back in time, where the rules of the modern world begin to fray and tear at the edges. The mountains don't care about your GPS, your satellite phone, or the comfort of your campfire. They watch with unblinking eyes made of obsidian and cold stone. When you walk these trails, you feel the prickle on the back of your neck, the distinct, undeniable sensation of being observed by something that doesn't belong in the light. In July of 2015, the Timber Creek Campground was supposed to be a sanctuary for a family looking to escape the grind. It is tucked away in the rugged hills near DeOrr, a place where the dirt roads turn to dust and the cell service dies miles before you reach the tree line. The creek itself is a silver ribbon of ice-cold water, cutting through the brush with a persistent, low-frequency hum. It is the kind of place where you think you can see everything coming, until you realize the woods have a way of folding in on themselves. The Kunz family arrived with the typical gear of a weekend excursion, oblivious to the fact they were stepping into a missing 411 nightmare. There was the father, the mother, the great-grandfather, and a family friend. 4 sets of adult eyes, meant to act as a perimeter. And then there was little DeOrr Kunz Jr., a 2-year-old boy in oversized cowboy boots, a tiny speck of bright color against the oppressive greens and browns of the wilderness. He was a child who loved the outdoors, unaware that the outdoors was about to swallow him whole. The camp was set up near the bank, the smell of wood smoke and pine needles mixing in the thin mountain air. It was a mundane scene, the kind of domesticity that feels safe because of its sheer boredom. They were unloading gear, making plans for a walk to the creek, and tending to the needs of the elderly great-grandfather. But in the backcountry, boredom is a mask that the environment wears right before it strikes. The birds had stopped singing, a detail noticed only in hindsight, leaving the forest in a state of suspended animation. DeOrr was playing near the edge of the campsite, his little boots crunching on the dry earth as he mimicked the movements of the adults. The parents decided to take a quick walk down to the water, assuming the grandfather had eyes on the boy. The grandfather, resting in his chair, assumed the parents had taken the child with them. It was a simple, tragic gap in communication. A 45-minute window where the boy existed in a state of total isolation. In those few minutes, the world didn't just change for the Kunz family. It broke. The forest didn't scream, and there was no sound of a struggle or a frantic cry for help. There was only the steady, indifferent rush of the creek and the sighing of the wind through the high canopy. When the parents returned from their brief walk, the question they asked was simple, but the answer would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Where is the baby? The grandfather pointed toward the brush, expecting to see the boy's blonde head bobbing through the tall grass. But there was nothing there but the swaying of the willow branches and the flickering of the shadows. The realization didn't hit like a hammer, it seeped in like cold water. A rising tide of panic that numbed the senses. They began to call his name, their voices thin and reedy against the vastness of the Salmon-Challis. Little man. DeOrr. But the forest offered no echo. They began to pace the perimeter of the camp, their eyes darting between the trees, expecting the boy to pop out from behind a boulder at any moment. Every stump looked like a crouching figure, and every rustle of the leaves sounded like a small footstep. But as the minutes ticked into an hour, the silence of the woods began to feel intentional. It was as if the environment itself was conspiratorial, holding its breath to hide the boy's location. The creek was the first place they checked, their hearts hammering against their ribs like trapped birds. The water was shallow, barely deep enough to cover a man's ankles in most places, and so clear you could see every speckled pebble on the bottom. There was no sign of a splash, no disturbed silt, and certainly no small body tumbling through the current. If he had fallen in, he would have been visible for hundreds of yards. But the water was as empty as the air. As the sun began to dip toward the jagged peaks of the mountains, the temperature plummeted, turning the sweat of their panic into a cold shiver. They notified the authorities, and soon the quiet campground was swarmed by deputies, search and rescue teams, and volunteers. They brought with them high-tech thermal imagers and teams of highly trained canines. But the tools of man seemed useless against the ancient density of the Idaho brush. It was as if the boy had simply ceased to be a physical entity. The searchers moved in tight lines, shoulder to shoulder, combing through every square inch of the terrain surrounding the campsite. They looked for a scrap of clothing, a scuff mark from a cowboy boot, or even a broken twig that might indicate a child's passage. They found nothing. No footprints were discovered in the soft mud near the creek, even though a 2-year-old's weight would have left a clear impression. It was the first of many, missing 411 markers that would define this case. One of the most chilling aspects of the search was the behavior of the tracking dogs. These were animals capable of finding a scent days old in the harshest conditions. Yet they couldn't find a single trace of DeOrr Kunz Jr. They would hit a certain point near the edge of the camp, and then simply stop, pacing in circles, or whining in confusion. It was as if the scent trail didn't go cold. It just ended, as if the boy had been lifted directly into the sky. Night in the Salmon-Challis is a different kind of darkness. A blackness so absolute that your eyes struggle to find a point of reference. The searchers worked through the night, their flashlights cutting weak yellow arcs through the gloom. They reported hearing strange sounds, clicks and whistles that didn't sound like any known animal in the region. Some spoke of a feeling of intense dread, a localized pressure in the air that made it difficult to breathe or think clearly. As days turned into weeks, the investigation took on a darker tone, with the weight of suspicion falling heavily on those who were there. The parents were interrogated, their lives dissected under the harsh light of public scrutiny. But despite the theories and the finger-pointing, not a shred of physical evidence was ever found to link them to a crime. There were no remains, no hidden burial sites, and no signs of foul play in the vehicles. The void remained unfilled. In the world of missing 411, there is a recurring theme of people vanishing near water and granite. Timber Creek has both in abundance, with massive outcroppings of stone that seem to hum with a strange energy. Some investigators have noted that these areas seem to be thin, places where the fabric of our reality isn't as sturdy as we'd like to believe. Out here, the line between what is possible and what is nightmare becomes blurred by the sheer scale of the unknown. There is a theory that doesn't make it into the official police reports. A whisper among those who have spent too long in the deep woods. They talk about the Glimmer Man, a phenomenon where the air seems to distort and ripple, like heat rising off a desert highway. It is a visual anomaly that suggests something is moving through the trees, something that doesn't reflect light the way we do. Could a small child, curious and unsuspecting, I have walked right into one of these ripples? The idea of a phase-shifting predator sounds like madness in the light of day, but in the heart of the Idaho wilderness, it feels like the only thing that fits. How else do you explain a child vanishing in 45 minutes with 4 adults nearby, leaving no tracks and no scent? The glimmer doesn't leave footprints, and it doesn't leave a trail for a dog to follow. It simply exists in the periphery, a ghost in the machine of the natural world, waiting for a moment of distraction. The search for DeOrr Kunz Jr. eventually involved thousands of man-hours, drones, and even divers in the deeper sections of the river miles away. Every cave was checked, every abandoned mine shaft explored, and every cliff face scanned. The result was always the same: silence. It is as if the mountain had opened its mouth and swallowed the boy whole, then closed it so tightly that not even a whisper could escape. For those who study these cases, the lack of scavengers is another red flag. In a typical mountain tragedy, nature eventually reveals what it has taken. But in many missing 411 disappearances, the bodies are either never found or are found in areas that have been searched multiple times before. It suggests that the person wasn't just lost. They were taken somewhere else entirely, somewhere outside the reach of our physical senses. Even now, years later, the Timber Creek Campground remains a place of profound unease. People who visit report the feeling of being watched. The same prickle on the neck that the first searchers felt in 2015. They talk about the quiet zones where the sound of the creek seems to vanish, replaced by a high-pitched ringing in the ears. It is a place marked by an absence that is almost physical in its intensity. The story of DeOrr Kunz Jr. is a haunting reminder that we are not the masters of the wild that we pretend to be. We build our roads and set up our tents, thinking we have conquered the landscape. But the landscape is patient. It waits for the 1 second you look away, the one moment you think you are safe. And in that second, it can take everything from you without leaving so much as a footprint in the dust. The boots of the little man remain empty, a symbol of a mystery that refuses to be solved. His disappearance sits in the archives of the unexplained, a cornerstone of the missing 411 phenomenon that defies logical explanation. Was it a predator, a tragic accident hidden by the terrain, or something far more ancient and terrifying? We may never know the truth, but the forest knows, and it isn't telling its secrets. Before we conclude this descent into the unknown, we must look at how this pattern repeats itself across the map of our national parks. In 1999, a 3-year-old boy named Jaryd Atadero vanished on a trail in the Poudre Canyon of Colorado. Like DeOrr, he was just a few feet ahead of his group when he disappeared into a landscape that offered no clues for 4 long years, until his clothing was found in a place it couldn't possibly have been. The parallels are too striking to ignore. The signatures of an intelligence that operates on a level we are only beginning to glimpse. It is an intelligence that thrives in the silence and the shadows, watching us from the edge of the campsite with eyes that don't blink. As you head out on your next adventure, remember the empty boots at Timber Creek. Watch the tree line, and never, ever turn your back on the woods. The missing 411 files grow longer every year, each entry a testament to the frailty of our presence in the wild. We are visitors in a realm that has its own laws, its own predators, and its own hungry voids. Stay on the trail, keep your loved ones close, and listen to the silence. Because sometimes, the silence is the only warning you will get before the world disappears, and you become just another name in the book of the lost. The brush at Timber Creek is a tangled mess of willow and sage, a silver-green labyrinth that can hide a person only 3 feet away. Searchers spoke of the optical illusions created by the shifting light through the branches, where every knot in a tree looked like a pair of watching eyes. They spent hours crawling on their hands and knees, parting the grass blade by blade, looking for any sign of a struggle. The ground was dry, brittle, and unforgiving, offering no soft earth to hold a footprint or a trace of DNA. In the dead of night, the silence would be broken by the sound of heavy movement just beyond the reach of the camp lights. It wasn't the sound of a deer or a bear, but something that moved with a heavy, bipedal cadence that stopped whenever a flashlight was turned in its direction. These ghost footsteps are a common report in missing 411 hotspots, adding a layer of psychological terror to an already desperate situation. The searchers felt a sense of heavy, crushing gravity in certain areas of the woods, a physical sensation that they were being pushed away from specific groves of trees. The weather during those first few days was unnaturally stagnant, the air hanging heavy and still like a shroud over the valley. There was no wind to carry a scent, no rain to wash away clues, and yet the search dogs acted as if the air itself was toxic. They would retreat from certain rock formations, their hackles raised, growling at the empty space between the boulders. It was as if they were sensing a presence that didn't register on any human instrument, a predator that existed just out of phase with our own reality. When the infrared cameras were brought in, they scanned the hillsides for any signature of heat that would indicate a living child. The screens showed the cooling rocks and the occasional elk, but in the area where DeOrr had vanished, there was only a chilling, uniform cold. Even the ground seemed to have lost its warmth, as if the energy had been sucked out of the environment by some unseen force. This thermal void is a phenomenon that haunts the investigators of the unexplained, suggesting that whatever took the boy left a scar on the atmosphere itself.